Start recording. So Ed Safer joined Brick Presbyterian Church 56 years ago.
Wow.
And has been very active in the church since. Currently, he's on session and chairs personnel committee. Interestingly enough, I asked John to search through all the pictures he's taken of people in church so I could post a picture of Ed with the last email I sent out. He couldn't find a single picture of Ed. So Ed somehow seems to sort of
photophobic.
Remain behind the scenes, but is so active and is so involved.
Wow.
So Ed, Dad was a minister, and I'm sure he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. Ed went to Princeton, and after graduating from Princeton, was an engineer at DuPont in their photo products division. Then went and got an MBA in finance and marketing, and I think met his first wife, Audrey, there. Am I right about that, Ed?
Undergraduate. I was
undergrad at Princeton. Oh, okay.
Here at Princeton.
Then he came to Rochester, and he came to Rochester for a job at Xerox. And I believe he's been in Rochester ever since, although he escapes to Florida for half the year. For a fair while. From 1971 to 2004, he started a marketing communications agency and retired from that and sold it in 2004. So now he lives both in Naples, Florida and in Rochester, right sort of around the corner from Eastman School of Music. And I'll have to tell you, I've been asking Ed probably for 6 or 7 years, every year, if he would share his spiritual journey. And it was always either in November or in February when we had the series. And he was always in Florida. So this year with Zoom, even if we'd had it earlier, he wouldn't have gotten scared. So compliments of COVID and the fact that this is later in the year, we are finally able to hear from Ed. And Ed, I'm just so delighted that you.
Yes, you can blame this on COVID. I couldn't escape another year. The only way I could offer an excuse was that I wasn't sure when I was going to be traveling back to Rochester. So we finally agreed on a date that I knew I'd be here. I would like to decline saying that I'm a resident or an inhabitant of Florida. I'm not happy with what's happening there.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And, I do go down 2 or 3 months a year, but that has been only since I've retired. Prior to that, it was just sort of a way to get away from the pressures of the business. But even then, we set our little condo up so that we both had a desk and could operate. We brought in 2 phone lines so that nobody knew we weren't in Rochester. And we did that for probably 15 years. But since I've been retired.
Blow your cover.
I'm sorry?
I'm so sorry to blow your cover. Now we know you're not in Rochester all the time.
Well, anyway, maybe I should give you just a little, before I really begin with what I prepared, a little bit of an overview of, this has been a journey down memory lane for me. Just the idea, I'm reminded of the forum we had on journals that Carol gave us. And I have never done that, but as I began to prepare for this, I realized that there were a lot of significant things in my life. I won't have time to share them all, but that have brought me to this place. 84 years of life on this interesting earth has seen a lot of change. My life actually began in Auburn City Hospital. My parents at the time were living in Cato, New York. My father was a seminarian at Auburn Seminary, and he was serving as a seminarian, a small church in Cato, New York. And Ron Treppening, I learned in coffee hour a number of years ago, also grew up in Cato. But I don't think our time overlapped. And from Cato, we moved to Scottsville, my father's first church and where he was ordained. And it was there that I started hearing names that have stayed with me ever since. And it probably is what drew me back to Brick Church when we moved back to Rochester. Names like Murray Cayley, Art Adams, and Dr. Nicely were all very familiar to me. And my father being in the same presbytery, I got my first education really in what presbytery life was like. And I think even there, we will see a lot of change. One of the themes, as I have ventured through this memory lane of mine, has been change. I think if we all think about where we were when we were children and where we are now, the amount of change that has occurred in our world and our country and even in our community is worth thinking about. From Scottsville, we moved to Sodus. Sodus was really my formative years. I went from first grade all the way through the end of my junior year in high school. Moved to Brookline, Massachusetts, which is really Boston. It's surrounded on all but one side by Boston.
Recording in progress.
And somehow I'm getting feedback. I'm not sure why, but I'm hearing my voice coming back at me. That it was Brookline that really sort of opened my eyes to a world. I think Sodus was really a most idyllic kind of community to grow up in. At that time was, I think, very much like Thornton Wilder's Our Town. I could identify with that place so easily. Brookline, it really opened me not only to the urban environments, but to a much narrower population of strivers, I guess I would call them. From there, I went to Princeton, and that's where I reacquainted with Bob Adams. He was a class ahead of me, and we were in Westminster Foundation together. Bob was a very bright, his talents were very different than mine, and we didn't really cross paths very much because I never was in any of the classes or courses that he was involved in. I had known Bob. I'd met Bob when I was in Sodus. We were at a conference together in Cooperstown, and Bob was this very bright, articulate leader of the conference that I was in, and that was really my first association with him. I guess I would mention a couple things about the Princeton experience. First place, it was a very idyllic environment. I've never been in an environment since that's quite like it. Its campus was like what I sometimes see as the model house, where everything is in proper place and perfectly coiffed and so on. Well, that was the Princeton campus, and it was that. And then I met a group of classmates that were unique to me. About 50% of them had come from prep schools, and another 50%, like myself, had come from varied backgrounds in public schools. And that's where I really began to get acquainted with the other side of life, if you will. Another aspect of this, it was vivid in my memories. I would come out of the library, and I used to escape to the library to try and study art our daily schedule was pretty heavy. In my case, I had labs almost every afternoon, and then I had to catch up on reading and other kind at night. But I'd go into the library and fall asleep. But when I would come out, I would often, the library is right next to the chapel, and the chapel it's sort of a small cathedral. It's really quite an imposing structure. And I would go in, and there would be students playing the organ, and those kind of memories are vivid, and I call them up and feast on them occasionally. Now, after that, maybe the more interesting part is why I did what I did. I was an undergraduate engineer, so the logical thing was to go on to graduate school in engineering, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to pursue that. So I took a job in engineering, and it was there that I really realized that my interests did not want to be limited to sort of a field of study. I was fairly eclectic in my approach. So I went to business school, and it was the idea that I would somehow either connect with a small company that I could then buy into, or I would start a company, and I felt like I needed to prepare for that. As it turned out, I heard about this company called Xerox, which at that time was all over the headlines in the business news. And I was from Rochester. I'd never heard of Xerox. So I signed up for an interview just to find out what this company was. And I'd learned that it was the Haloid company, which I was familiar with. And I was very impressed with what they were doing. And I just felt like it would be a great experience to come back to Rochester. So I joined. I accepted their offer. I was with them 4 or 5 years. There was considerable change over that period of time. Joe Wilson's values started to erode, and I was on the path for having to live the corporate life and move around as corporate executives did, and I wasn't up to that. I liked Rochester. My wife liked Rochester, and we decided that maybe this was the time that I would make a break and see what I could do in the way of starting a business. Well, as that all came about, I was feeling a little guilty. My wife was freelancing, that I wasn't involved. I really had a struggle with that. That maybe it was one of the more spiritually challenging periods of my life. The more I tried to assist her, the more I realized that there was a business in there somewhere. And so we worked out an arrangement where we would be 50-50. I was always drawn by the fact that if it had been 51 to her, we could have been a minority business. But we chose to do it the hard way. And it was in that experience that I learned much about what it was to work collegially, and where the authority was one of what you could contribute, and not what your power was. And so that's kind of a quick background. I admit, Carolyn, it has been 6 or 7 years. You've been very patient. I must say a lot has happened since Carolyn first asked me to share my journey. I'm sure what I'm going to share today is not what I would have shared then. Too much has happened to awaken and change me over that period of time. And I confess some of the events that have received the headlines over the last 5 or 6 years have been spiritually troubling to me, and probably for all of you as well. Certainly as a country, we have become more divided. Our politics has become uglier and more dysfunctional. The values that are governing an acceptable society conduct has eroded. And I guess I would add that respectful public discussion and compromise has been replaced by doing whatever is necessary to win. And even what we are winning is often questionable and reflects questionable values. This has, for me, a significant spiritual effect, and I'm sure it does for you. Particularly concerning to me is the continued loss of membership in our mainline churches. Not because this is a contest really of numbers, but because the values that have led to a healthier society, the values that have worked to overcome injustice, and those that we have inherited from our knowledge of the life of Jesus are being drowned out or lost. And this while the religious right are promoting a male-dominated country as the will of God, and attempting to roll back the clock on LGBTQ rights, as well as women's rights over their own being. And they are willing to skewer the hard-won values of our democracy to accomplish it. These are not the values of my spiritual sensitivities wish to promote, and I'm sure you are with me on that. This should really concern us a great deal, and as members dwindle, I hope the congregation will be willing to do our part to explore ways to meet the spiritual needs of more people. The congregation has something important to offer this community. It needs to be known. It is tolerant of spiritual exploration, not bound by dogma. It is progressive, with much of our energy going to constructively working for justice where injustice exists. And as we consider our future, I hope we look for a pastor who wants to join us in that journey of making this church relevant to more people. Our community needs it, our nation requires it, and we can become leader in this effort, as we were in the denomination when we launched an effort with All May Freely Serve. This is really a challenge that I could enthusiastically enjoy myself. But you've asked me to talk about my spiritual journey. Not that that's disconnected, but those are the things that I've contemplated over the last 5 or 6 years. But let me just sort of begin to share. I put my thoughts together under a kind of a theme. It says the questions, my guide to spiritual growth. It's the questions that have really stirred my spiritual activity. And I'm not going to cover a lot of those questions, but I'm going to give you some background on why I think it's the questions that are so important. And I think you would agree that central to our uniqueness as human beings is our curiosity. It is a part of our creation, a gift that God has provided us. And as curiosity results in questions and the pursuit of answers, and with the deeper questions of life, the answers are often harder to find. So as I reflected on my spiritual journey, I think it has been about the questions of the moment, the questions that have caused me to stop and think, the questions that have reflected doubt about something I've read or heard, but always it has been the questions that provided the energy and the motivation for seeking this understanding. Let me share a little self-awareness. My rational processes are probably much stronger than my intuitive elements of my being. Maybe this can be explained by the fact that I was heavily immersed in scientific disciplines, physics, chemistry, math, so on, when I was an undergraduate. And these disciplines have given me tools for looking at the world. I tend to look at the world through the lens of that kind of structure. It goes something like this. I make an observation that leads to a question. The question begs for analysis. Analysis looks for available data, leading to possible insights and new understanding. That's pretty much the scientific process of thinking. Now, as religious people, we are prone to ask God why, and then we wait for an answer. The scientist makes an observation and asks why, and I ask, are they really different? Is God working in this process? Are the tools of the scientist gifts of God? In my journey, I have found that the rational tools of scientists useful when seeking a religious understanding. As you are aware, denominations organize around beliefs. And as members, we inherit these beliefs. It becomes our tribe's uniqueness. But I've always struggled against accepting a belief without knowing why. I accept membership, but I continue to question. It leads to an evolving understanding of the questions. The beliefs are the starting point. They register as my current understanding. So beginning with a wellspring of curiosity, leading to questions important to my experience of life, resulting in learnings, tentative beliefs, and then lead to growth and understanding, and later more questions. This thought sequence has been what I might call my spiritual growth cycle. But note, it begins with question and evolves through doubt to changing understanding. As I have experienced it, it has been an iterative spiritual process throughout my adult life. I think without a doubt, it has been the questions that have energized my spiritual journey. That has kept me engaged. Questions that reveal uncertainty, questions that may challenge beliefs, questions that lead just possibly to new understandings. And for me, the questions have led to a deepening, more meaningful faith. But whenever I have been in an environment where I have not been able to question someone else's truth, it has deadened my spirit. And maybe some of you have experienced that as well. Where there is a willingness to question and explore, I feel my spiritual energy and I sense an aliveness. It is not whether one belief is right or even wrong. It is a process of pondering, seeking, understanding that provides the spiritual growth, meaning, and engagement that is so enlivening to my life. It is this experience of seeking that I would hope could be available to more people. Let me qualify my journey. It has not made me a more able theologian or an informed Bible scholar. And as you can probably understand from these thoughts, I can't say my spiritual journey has made me more religious, the way we would consider devotion or adherence to sectarian beliefs and traditions. Yet as I've experienced our religious traditions, they have provided a base from which questions can emerge. I would also qualify my journey by saying that some of our traditions touch me more than others. I appreciate worship that might be characterized as high church or more formal. And to that, I might add that when I was well, of course, I grew up in the smaller churches, Scottsville, Sodus. Brookline was a little larger. But it wasn't until I got to college that I really experienced tall, steeple churches. And one was in Bryn Mawr, where my wife was a student, or my then future wife was a student. I also experienced it in Plainfield, our first home after marriage. Interestingly enough, both of these churches wore morning coats. And the ushers wore morning coats and greeted you at the door. I'm not sure that that's what I was speaking of when I say more formal. But then when we moved to New York, we were one block from Riverside Church. So the experiences of those churches were important to me. And there are times when I wish maybe we were a little more so, but that's a personal thing, and I don't have a big problem with the way we are a little more loose with our worship service. Now, also, I acknowledge questions can be uncomfortable. They can test belief and disturb one's faith. And that's not easy for a lot of people. They leave you wanting answers, answers that often do not exist with any certainty. But our faith, it is our faith really that fills this void, and our current beliefs stand more as certain answers yet to be discovered. And in my early years, pre-college, I think my faith journey was formed by what I might call religion by osmosis. If I was present, maybe something would get through to me. It really was a period where values were reinforced sort of day after day. Dogma, creeds, or forms of repetitive religious practice, I just never could quite attach to that. It was there to contemplate if I chose, but I felt no real obligation to accept it. Obviously, religion by osmosis was enhanced being in a religious family. I don't say that I got it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but certainly I could observe a lot of the elements of my father's life. And that was one of the joys, I think, of growing up in a pastor's family, because I got to go along with him on a lot of his journey. Often I'd get to meet some interesting people, or I would just go out for a ride with him as a result of his calling on people. Anyway, so I think I was reached less by deliberate indoctrination and more being available to the issues when they surfaced. When something of interest in me was raised in discussion, I began to learn to think more for myself, and I began to see the Bible stories as allegories. I began to understand the Beatitudes as the key teachings of Christian faith, and I struggled with the notion that Jesus died on the cross for my sake. And I certainly didn't understand being raised on the third day. I worked that over in my mind for many times over many years. Jesus, God in our likeness, that a mystery. Just accept it literally. No. Was it necessary for Jesus to be the Son of God? Maybe just a prophet? Does the Son of God add a stronger reason to pay attention? And how did I understand God? Those were the kinds of things that sort of went through a child's head. And I think probably, if we were honest, probably continue to go through it even as adults. God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, clearly this was a vision of God, was not connecting with me in my teens. When I entered college, my undergraduate physics professor was John Wheeler. I don't really think that will mean too much to you, but it was at Princeton in the 50s where much of the theoretical physics work was being undertaken on the origin of the universe. Especially it was being informed by Einstein's general theory of relativity, and Einstein was living in the community at that time. And so there was a lot of dialogue that was going back and forth. And relatively early in my experience in this class with John Wheeler, who was just a wonderful gentleman. If he had an ego, you didn't see it. And I became aware that he was working on these kinds of problems, and I didn't know quite what to make of it. But it opened me to a whole new area of thought in a religious context. At the time, my comprehension of the universe did not extend much beyond our galaxy. I think I understood the sun and the planets going around it, but beyond that, I thought that was our universe. And I think probably there was thinking that took us beyond that, but I wasn't there with it. So this sort of began an understanding of my awareness, at least, of the nature of the universe. Were we beginning to understand God in a different way? You know, as these physicists were contemplating our understanding of the universe right to its very beginnings. What I could comprehend really set my mind in a buzz. It was fun to think about. I felt like really quite inadequate in answering the questions it raised, as I did in answering the questions that arose trying to understand the Christian God. The cosmology and theology were beginning to blend. Could we find answers in our creation with a rational scientific explanation that all along we attributed to God? We will have to live with that question a little longer. But in the last 60, 70 years, maybe a little longer, there has been much has happened in this world. And then it will affect our understanding of God. These two professors, John Wheeler and Robert Dick, who are there on the faculty. And incidentally, Robert Dick got his PhD at the University of Rochester. They were the driving a theory of the origin of the universe, which then speculated the existence of what John Wheeler called wormholes. And they ultimately became known as black holes. And at the time, the implication was that the origin of the universe began with one original black hole. Now, to think that what we have created comes out of just one space requires a lot of stretching, but there is a religious issue here that sort of intrigued me. The black hole theory was received with, at the time, with considerable derision in some quarters, and it became known as the Big Bang theory, which was a pejorative way of one physicist sort of declaring his non-belief, I guess, as a way to kind of express his derision of the wild theory. But 60 years later, with mounting evidence, the theory appears to be holding up quite well. They have been able to actually observe with our new space telescopes, one of which Kodak had much to do with, has recently captured a black hole. Now, what does this all say? To explain the makeup of a black hole, the cosmologists hypothesized that the existence of invisible matter or dark matter, and that, in other words, this was not just empty space, that there is something going on there, and they've been trying to discover it. So wrap your mind around that for a minute. So very dark matter cannot be detected except indirectly, and it is inferred by observing that the galaxies do not behave as expected, unless unseen matter was present. And it is that they have been looking at, and they have been able to calculate that probably 95% of our universe is made up of dark matter. The question at this point for me is not whether there is a God, but how does my understanding of God change with this growing knowledge? And this has kind of been the theme of my spiritual life. It is one of being curious, looking for the data and what it says, and then trying to understand. So as this growing knowledge it really does keep me in awe. A God to be respected, powerful, with creative canvas that is bigger than we can comprehend. And if I remember correctly, scientists have estimated the origin of the universe occurred some 13.8 billion light years ago, about 3 times older than our Earth. And using the Hubble, that's the one that Kodak had much to say about or do with, and now the new Webb space telescopes, they have been able to penetrate the universe to see the galaxy some 700 million light years after the Big Bang. So 700 million light years versus 13.8 billion light years. We are now able to look back in time. What what is that? Some 12 million light years, almost to the time of the Big Bang. That's a long way from Earth. Just consider our galaxy, the Milky Way, on which we enjoy life on Earth within a planetary system that revolves around a small star, our sun, one of the smaller stars of our own galaxy, which is but one of an estimated 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. And we now know the universe is continuing to expand. And in my mind, that's awesome. So back to the question that I first began to contemplate some 66 years ago: what is God? I worship in the context of our current understanding of the universe. My mind is capable of understanding God as the creator, my creator, the creator of the universe, and scientific data says God is still creating. The universe is expanding. Its current radius of the universe is estimated to be some 46.5 billion light years. That's the radius. My goodness, I can't put my head around that. You can comprehend that dimension, right? Here on Earth, we tend to talk about large tracts of land and how many football fields can fit on it. Now we are talking about billions of light years. Some 2,000 years ago, the shepherds were entranced by stars in the sky. Today, we are entranced by the origins of the universe and the nature of our creator. That is a big change in understanding. So when it comes to God and our understanding of God, science offers some more interesting data to the creation story. You are probably aware that the speed of light is constant. It turns out that there are many constants in the physical world. These constants regulate, among other things, forces between atoms. If any of these constants were even slightly different, we would not have life on Earth. We would not have the elements that we need to exist, and we would not be equipped to use these elements to make useful things. It should be noted that it was Robert Dicke, the professor I mentioned earlier, physicist at Princeton, that first made this observation, pointing out that these constants were crucial in what has been created. Does that not suggest a guiding hand in the creation? So when the human mind thinks creation, we think a plan, a process, substances to use and manipulate, dimensions, relationships, and forces that hold things together, the engineering, if you will. And these are the elements that are being discovered as we attempt to understand the origin of the universe. The quest for understanding, led by questions, has resulted in powerful new understanding of our origins and how and what have been created. The human mind says this did not just happen with this precision without a creator. For me today, God is the creator at work, assembling a place with life, not possible except with strict imposition of a bevy of required constants. And these observations only increase my reason to be in awe. A force, an entity, a creator, we must assume cares as much about our human experience as it cares about the creation and beauty of the universe. I can accept our Christian God as our creator. And with that understanding that we have obtained in the last 70 years, I have a little more appreciation of God's handiwork. Somewhere I read, everywhere science and reason see no cause is where a religious mind finds God. I think we can also say everywhere science and reason see a cause, the religious mind has a deeper appreciation of God. The rational mind looks for evidence, data to support the belief. But with no data of support, we depend on our belief. And like an hypothesis waiting for data, it fills the void in our understanding. This is where I am with God on my spiritual journey. Another question I struggle with, that what is the purpose and reward of a religious life? Does it enhance or inhibit the spiritual growth cycle? That is, does our religious experience strengthen our spiritual core? enhance our insights and understanding, enliven our hearts, and imbue meaning to our lives? If it does, we are rewarded and crave for more. We apply regular energy to this endeavor of religious experience. But if our religious experience represses the urge to deepen our understanding by enforcing the certainty of beliefs, inhibiting the necessity of exploration that is craved by the soul, then religion can easily slide into a cult-like authority. And accepting beliefs without an accompanying exploration is not a deeply rewarding, but can be reassuring for those who are inclined in that direction. I have always had trouble accepting or being drawn into a religious expression that relies on charisma of the leader, the certainty of their truth, and their skill in manipulating the emotions of the assembled. Not long after our family moved to Boston, the youth group in our church was invited to something, as I remember, was called Youth for Christ. It was once a month gathering in the sanctuary of the historic, if you're familiar with Boston, the historic Park Street Church that sits next to the old Granary burial ground. And it sits prominently across from the Commons on just a few buildings down from the Capitol. And it's kind of a handsome building. With steeple, it was for many years the tallest building in our country, and for years after was the tallest building in Boston. It has the pastor at that time was a renowned evangelical named Harold Ockenga. And in the early 50s, he organized what we now know as the Association of Evangelical Churches, that today wields an incredible amount of political influence throughout our nation. Though I have real problems with their activities, my reason for mentioning this is now my one attendance at this youth event instinctively rebelled against what I heard and the manner in which it was conducted. Heavy-handed appeals and an onslaught of platitudes. It was kind of skin deep religion, religious salve, if you will. But for me, it offered nothing to assist my journey. I was curious about the evangelical approach to living a religious life. And I never went back. Now, I caution, I venture a bit of heresy here. If you indulge me, in the Reformed Protestant tradition, our pastors are teachers or rabbis, but our denominations impose basic beliefs. These fundamental beliefs become the organizing principle of our tribe. And our denominations expect acceptance of these imposed beliefs, often without exploration or understanding. I did attend a catechism class before I became a member, but I'm not sure we're spending any time really helping people there. This is not to say that exploration of these basic beliefs will lead us to conclude the beliefs are wrong or misleading for us. It is to say that they have not been made part of us. If these fundamental beliefs are imposed without the willingness for healthy exploration, spiritual growth is inhibited. No seeking is shallow acceptance. Beliefs are fragile unless supported by a depth of understanding. And I'm reminded of an observation I think I can say was made by G.K. Chesterton. Christianity has not been tried and found wanting, but found difficult and never tried. But the trying does require some effort. And I'm going to go so far as to suggest that failure to develop that capacity to teach honest exploration by denomination of faith may be one cause for our decline. The result, too many have checked out on religious life, and this group is growing. This is a diverse group. There are many reasons why religious affiliation has little relevance for this group. One that is often cited is the hypocrisy that exhibited by religious groups, and too often the observer paints the sins of one denomination to all, and our denomination is not immune. I need to acknowledge the importance of this community of seekers, though, to my spiritual journey. A lot of what I just declared is, in my mind, what this community is about. The sharing, the caring, the awakening, the learning, and the willingness to explore have all added dimensions to the deeper part of my thought and being. and participating in this community has, if nothing else, been a stimulus to my spiritual growth and cycle. The sharing, the caring, the awakening, the learning that I have experienced is what this community could offer a wider community. It could provide the same benefit that I have found here and you have found here to a wider, not affiliated segment of our community. I hope we will commit ourselves to this possibility. But in so doing, we will need to examine how it encourages spiritual exploration, deeper creative expressions, and a continued commitment to justice. In my journey, I have too often been saddened by injustice disguised and protected by dogma hiding as religious beliefs. I think we can all find examples of that. Religious beliefs alien to the teachings of Jesus, beliefs hiding behind literal interpretations of the Bible, biblical interpretation devoid of context and motivated and skewed by self-interest. It is difficult to counteract since our nation holds religious freedom as a central tenet of our society. Because this freedom can be so easily abused, I would contend spiritual communities such as ours are more important than ever. They must play an effective role in overcoming this ignorance and abuse, and we must be in the game. It should be an expression of our collective spiritual journey. It is my hope this awakening to injustice and the harm it causes to those affected and to our society as a whole will always be emphasized by our congregation. And there has never been a time in my life when this has been more important. Let me conclude where I began. The questions as my guide to spiritual growth. The importance of questions in our religious life was first brought to my conscious thought by David Lee's presentation several years ago. In that presentation, he quoted Rabbi Abraham Heschel, and it has stayed with me, and it is the basis of my theme today. The meaning one obtains from religion is all about giving attention to the relevant questions. And in Heschel's words, we need to recover the questions. Well, if I have not bored you completely, I want to thank you anyway for the opportunity to share some of those thoughts, and maybe we have some time for questions.
Ed, you have given us so much to think about, and I am, for one, very glad it's being recorded so that we can go back and listen and unpack the many things you have raised for us today. And I would agree that the reason I can feel comfortable in downtown church is because questions are allowed and supported and encouraged. So Ed likes questions. Anybody have a question they have for Ed at this point?
Well,
I have one question that I still haven't answered for myself. I'll put it out there. When we think of religion, is it relevant to today's secular world, the way we undertake it, or is it simply an escape or a respite from a demanding world? But that's one to think about.
Kim.
Ed, I don't have one question. I have probably a million, and half of them will occur to me later. This was absolutely fascinating. What a fine mind you have and heart. Just great. It's been all about questions for me too. And instead of having a more scientific approach to questions, which I appreciate, I think I also had very emotional and at times very painful. So I agree with you that the questions are key. I thought of one thing. Another big question now is, what was before the Big Bang, right? What was the nature of anything before that? And that may be a question, that, or an answer that will be, long after we're gone, will come out. Do you have like have you ever doubted God's existence? There's a great quote I just read by Shelby Spong, S-P-O-N-G.
Yep.
He's great. Yeah, something about, that, or maybe, I'm sorry, maybe it was Beaker, something like, faith and doubt exist, and it is the doubt that causes all the prickles and stuff that cause the energy and the excitement to kind of happen.
Yeah, well, you got several questions there.
Sorry.
It may be the 23rd century or the 24th century before we answer your first question.
Mhm.
Or it may never be answered. I'm not sure. But it is amazing that, yes, I think we probably have all had doubts because it doesn't fit. This mystery of God doesn't fit with our everyday experience and so on. Now, I'm not going to speak as a theologian. I'm just speaking for what my personal struggles have been. The more that you dig into this with what we're learning, the more we have to feel that there is some guiding hand there. It helps erase some doubt. Now, the real question is, when we think of God, is we all put our own concepts to it. We attribute things to God. So God, in some ways, is a concept. How real is it? And is it a force? Is it a is it a being like we experience beings? We certainly have attributed that when we think God the Father. I'm not sure how we got the Father. Who sort of thought that it had to be a father as opposed to whatever. It's like, but we have, as human beings, have genderized God, and we have somehow thought of God in our likeness, and that maybe was reinforced with making Jesus Son of God. But I don't know whether that's the doubt is that what we can experience is that there is a guiding hand, and we are being given a life. We have something to offer. We can experience. That gives us meaning to be here, and that's the gift that God provides us. If you say, and that's how I see it in my world today.
David Lee has his hand up.
All right, Ed, thanks so much. There's more Heschel coming next week also.
Okay.
But this is a provocative question that I've used in other contexts, and I throw it out to everybody. If Paul, St. Paul says that the church is the body of Christ and we're all parts of that body, what part of the body do you imagine yourself to be?
Oh boy. Now that's a good question for all of us. Especially in today's world where there's so much denial and conflict, and it says to me a lot about how important our values need to be reclaimed. Life is far more. Do we need wars in order to make life exciting or rewarding? I just, in my own mind, feel that a lot of what is happening today is because we have lost some of what we were given some 2,000 years ago. And over those 2,000 years, we have done some things to aggrandize the leaders, to, do they really speak to the individuals and make their life more rewarding? Or is it one of controlling the way they think and the way they operate? And what I'm seeing in today's world with even our own country, where we have created a group of people that are more intent on retaining their power rather than sharing it, assisting in the lives of more people, help making our society more healthy. I see it's more important than ever that we join together as believers in some of these common values. And I struggle with that because I'm not an organizer. I'm not a person that feels they would be very good at running for office or leading a political environment. But I think it's essential that we recover some of those values and work towards building a more just society. And the work that we're doing in justice in our congregation, it needs to be expanded. It needs all the effort that we can give to it, and we need to get allies in this. And I think that's one of the advantages of having Spiritus a part of our immediate physical facility.
Thank you, Ed. There are more questions, but we've run out of time. So Bob Carlisle and Pat Tweet at some point have questions for you that they would like to ask. So I hope they have that opportunity. I just want to say thank you, thank you. Thank you for saying yes this time. I'm sure you felt a little bit like your hand had been twisted or arm had been twisted, but there are so many things that you said today that I'm going to savor. And one comment you made that I just really liked was the fact that you have memories that you feast on. When you talked about the organ playing in Princeton, but you are not stuck in your past. You know, you are always looking forward and asking questions and looking at how things could be better and how things could be different. And I imagine that's a key to why you are so young at 84 years old. Because you know, you're just embracing the questions and asking them and living into them. And I think that's I want to look at that as a model for myself.
One thing that I hope that everybody sort of might spend a little time contemplating. My 84 years takes me back to what, if I took 84 years backwards from my birth, we would be in like 1854 or something. The amount of change that has occurred and that is occurring suggests that religion needs to look at what needs to be added to our understanding. And there is a lot of people thinking about the nones, if you will, those that are religiously unaffiliated, and why. We're not doing our job. We're not connecting them to the spiritual essence of our life. And we need to look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're on session. Keep our feet to the fire.
Yeah.
Has been very preoccupied with a lot of here and nows. And
Yes.
it's been very difficult for us to push ourselves into the future. But the transition committee probably is doing some of that. And some of this will be, I'm sure it might be helpful to them.
Well, thank you again. And we'll see you in days to come and maybe hours to come.
Yeah, I'm not, since this little spike, I haven't attended since I've been back. If any of you watch the maps of Florida are way, way down where we would like to be. But when I got up here, it was spiking and it's still going up. So and at my age, I guess I have to be a little more careful.
Bye-bye all.
Bye all.